Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
All right, here I is. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thursday, March 16th, 2023. Oh, my God, I just realized. So it's the NC... Oh, I can't say it, right? Are you supposed... Well, no one monitors to see whether or not you say... Oh, my God, the NCAA is having its tournament today. So it's March Madness. I think that's the phrase that you're still allowed to say. Nobody has to get paid if you say March Madness. And I guess it... the stupid tournament. Even the stupid tournament is complicated. It starts today, i.e. already started. Because now, these past couple of years, they have had this extra round, which, they're very cleverly expanding things and coming up with new names. And so now, instead of the final four, the big thing at the end, they have the first four. There's a mini tournament of sorts in which four teams who are on the bubble and not guaranteed entry into the tournament can play their way in. And so they take that chance, and that has happened, and I guess they're in and the brackets are complete, and I guess games start usually, noon on Thursday? That's today, just an hour after the show. And once again, I've forgotten to fill out the bracket. I'm just too damn busy, and, things happen at night for me, and, a lot of meetings and other stuff. And none of it has to do anything with the show either. The show does not improve at all except for getting material, I guess, to complain about in the morning. So, other stuff has kept me busy, and, that's when I would ordinarily fill out the brackets. And, annually, I'm torn about whether or not to participate because, on the one hand, I don't know anything about basketball. On the other hand, if I actually make an effort to try and fill out a bracket with some thought, then I'm invested in the outcome, and I like to watch and see how I've done with the picks. But I like to participate, even if for no other reason than to have my small wager included along with everybody else so that it's more fun. There's more people participating. Yeah, I lose, but I'm happy enough if the person who wins has a larger number of people that they were able to overcome in order to win. And, it makes it more enjoyable for others. So I guess in between the end of the show and getting Scott the links as quickly as possible, I'll just randomly poke some buttons and make some picks. I can do it by computer now. And then, sacrifice myself for the rest, for the greater good. So if anybody has any picks or some teams that they think ought to win or ought to be given a second look, go ahead, send them to me. What the hell? Maybe I'll go with your thing. And then, I'll tell you how we did. And of course, no money changes hands because wink, wink, that's the way things work in the world. Just like you're not supposed to say it's the NCAA, Division I men's basketball championship, the one that everybody is following and talking about. When they say the brackets, they should, as Greg will point out, no doubt when he gets here, they should be following the women's bracket. It's actually in many ways much more competitive and exciting and brings in players from different places, not necessarily all the same schools. Although actually, I guess the women's game has certainly developed to the point where there are obviously annual powerhouses who are there. It's not as wide open as perhaps it once might have been. So that's actually good for the game. So anyway, and they play a great game. And, of course, he's proud of the Connecticut teams that are fielded in the women's division because they are perennial winners as well. And so, he should be. All right, let's see. Aside from that brief moment of panic, is there anything else that we need to cover today? There is, as it happens. I have my own raft of stories saved up, and Greg has been generating his own, and they're floating down the mighty Mississippi or something like that, or maybe the swollen Mississippi. Are we flooding yet? It is spring. Should be hearing about the various parts of the country that have flooded, that normally flood. We've only been hearing about the parts of the country that only occasionally flood out on the West Coast, thanks to the atmospheric river, or whatever that is, and apparently it never seems to stop. And so snow is falling around. I'm seeing these fantastic, i.e. disastrous, things being promoted on the Weather Channel. The Weather Channel, of course, I guess in everybody is in the quest for clicks and eyeballs, and they've sort of become the disaster channel. But that's been a long time in the making. But now they bother you in the morning with alerts, which I'm sure I could turn off somehow. But now I find myself fascinated by weather alerts. All the feet and feet of snow that have been falling in the west, and I understand there was just a big nor'easter storm in the east. We can catch up on that. Maybe Greg knows a little bit about that. But dumping feet and feet of snow on top of places where mall roofs are collapsing, giant flat expanses with 10 feet of snow on them. And, all sorts of damage being done to people's homes, including one that really surprised me was enough snow piling up on people's gas meters, natural gas meters that are hooked up to the back of the house, for all the heating and whatever else it is we're doing with natural gas these days. And apparently you can put enough snow on top of one of those things. And they're sturdy metal piping, they're very rugged looking outdoorsy things. And if you pile up enough snow on top of them, I guess the weight of the snow plus the cold plus whatever else, it develops cracks. It breaks the things. They blow up. They're setting off gas explosions, or at least one person had a gas explosion. I don't know whether this is happening up and down the street, but you know how it is. One guy got it on his car dashboard cam or Ring doorbell cam, and now everything is on camera now. And there was an explosion, and I don't know. I guess the gas meter was probably too woke. That was what it was. I don't know why I puzzle things out anymore. Why use science when you can just blame it on woke? Speaking of which, Greg has woken up and is
I'm awake.
ready. Yeah.
I'm awake.
And here you are. Did you get Storm? I know you were tweeting. You were tweeting on the old Twitter bird site about the birds in your yard feeding before the storm.
There were two storms.
Aha.
And the first one, we were supposed to get about 4 to 6 inches, and we got like a half. And the second one was really weird. We were supposed to get 5 to 7. We got 4.5. Yeah. But it was like in 2-inch layers. There was a burst of 2, which you could easily shovel. And then there was another burst of 2 a couple hours later, and then another burst of 2. So it was easy to keep up with.
Well, that was convenient.
And in this particular storm, your elevation would dictate how much snow you got. So even within an individual town in Connecticut, one side of the town might get 2 inches, the other side 10.
Oh, wow.
If it were just a little bit higher. So as we say here, if you were in the hills, you're going to get a foot.
Okay.
And where I was, we got maybe barely 4. And so it wasn't that bad, but it was a storm nonetheless with winds and such. But we didn't get buried and nobody blew up.
Okay, well that's good news. And no socialism for you. Everybody gets their own individual.
The bears are waking up, but they're probably looking outside at the weather and saying, "I'm going back to sleep."
Right. Roll over. Hit the snooze
yes,
button.
I know they don't truly hibernate, but they do sleep under your porch.
Okay. I mean, don't argue about what he's doing there. Just be aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, there is a Connecticut family with a bear cam with a bear sleeping under their porch. They found it and decided to not disturb it, which was wise. I think.
Right. Did they get a release?
Let sleeping bears lie, I always say.
Right. It's not something you think of, in terms of, what's going on in suburban Connecticut? Bears under the porch. But
we've had bears on our porch.
Okay.
And we have video of such. And they really love the bird feeders, and so that's a dilemma. Because I love the bird feeders too, and I'm not arguing with a bear over it. If a bear is there, bear gets first dibs.
The birds
but,
can do it.
If you want bears not to show up at your house, you're supposed to take your feeders down, and I just can't do that.
Yeah, well, the birds, would argue with you. So you can't win.
Anyway, I came across this random, out-of-context tweet from my friend Susan Demis, who tweets over at Michigan Advance and tells us about all things Michigan. And she was, just instrumental in following, little stories like they want to kidnap their governor and kill her, or what happened with the Michigan election, which maybe we'll have time to cover in the second part of the show. But she just tweeted this, and I think she was referring to
me,
Tudor Dixon and Christine Karamba, but also you, and I'll tell you how. She said, quote, "We were wrong about everything last election. So should we change course and maybe listen to different people and take them seriously? LOL, no.
That is silly.
So I think she was talking about the Michigan Republican Party, but she could easily have been talking about mainstream media. And this could be a history of why blogs started. Oh. And frankly, it could be a mission statement for why we do this show. I mean, we do this show because David and I have been chatting with each other for like 15 years, and we just like talking to each other. But, why do we do this? Because everybody else that you hear is wrong about everything. And we
want our chance.
They don't ever change course. So we should comment on it. And that's why we're here.
Yeah. No reason we can't also be wrong about everything. Let's go.
Yeah, but we'll be wrong in a totally different way.
Yes. Nuanced. You have to look for it.
Woke. I don't know.
Right. Okay.
Speaking of which, this is a article in the New York Times. Because you need a fact check for this these days. No, wokeness did not cause Silicon Valley's bank collapse.
Wow, I can't believe it.
Blaming workplace diversity or environmentally and socially conscious investments for the firm's downfall signals, quote, a complete lack of understanding of how banks work.
Oh, well, you'll need
said.
one of those.
Yes.
In order to figure things out.
Wokeness is why I can't get money out of my ATM.
Right.
Well, what are you doing? Well, I stuck my finger in it and it didn't give me money.
Yeah.
Well, you have a complete lack of understanding of how ATMs work.
Right.
Well, none of that's true. It's wokeness, I tell you.
They immediately tell me I have to put some sort of woke code into this thing.
Or woke card or something, It is ridiculous. It's wokeness. So, there's that. There's still stuff going on with the banking industry. And since I'm not a finance guy and don't understand any of this stuff, I read a lot about it to try to get an idea of what's going on.
And they won't tell you.
And I found some interesting stuff. So I thought I'd share it with you.
All right.
So there's another bank, First Republic.
What? Another one.
Which is in a little bit of trouble today. Barron's has a really interesting history of First Republic Bank and Silicon Valley Bank.
No.
And they note that both of those banks made the same flawed bet, and now they're paying. But they're really very different. They're the same in the financial issues they got into, but they're different in terms of who they are and what they represent. So they say one of the many mysteries surrounding the recent banking crisis is that two of the institutions caught up in the mess, Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, and First Republic, were located in the San Francisco area.
What?
The Silicon Valley Bank was located in Santa Clara at the south end of Silicon Valley, and First Republic in the city itself, 47 miles to the north. While there may not be any direct connections, and to be clear, as of this writing, Silicon Valley Bank has failed and First Republic has not.
Oh, well, that's no good.
There's some intriguing similarities and in the end, perhaps a flawed common denominator when it comes to understanding and managing customers. So they were founded just 2 years apart, Silicon Valley Bank in 83 and First Republic in 85. They're relatively young companies. And First Republic has long projected itself as an old-school white shoe institution, catering to an elite retail and business clientele, mostly in wealthy enclaves in the coast. For example, one customer of First Republic said, so it was like this. Their bank manager is like a statesman. Like he's really polished. Once he found out my wife and I were visiting New York City, and he just sent over tickets to our hotel to a Lincoln Center performance. So, in effect, if you read the article, you can compare the cultures at these two banks as if First Republic is going to do some recreational stuff, then they go play golf. And if Silicon Valley is going to do some recreational stuff, they'll choose competitive cycling.
Yes. Both extremely woke sports.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So the Silicon Valley, on the other hand, embraced startup culture, no ties. They had a wine division, which seems to have figured prominently, says Barron's, if not from a profit and loss standpoint, but for optics. They're known for the wine business, and they're always having these fancy wine shindigs.
Sure.
Because, it's California, and they're wine.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, that's, that's still upper crusty. Right?
Yeah, so both of these, coming from sort of different culture directions, did the same thing. Pandemic happens.
All right.
A lot of money flows out to try to keep the economy going.
Yeah.
people, if you're venture capital or if you're small business, all of a sudden have a lot more money than you did because of this. You got to put it somewhere. So you put it in these banks. Now, these banks
sounds normal.
Now find their deposits tripling over a couple of years.
Okay.
And by the way, if your profits triple over a couple of years, why is woke bad for business?
I don't know.
Even if what you're claiming is true.
Okay.
Like, woke broke these banks. Well, woke made them triple their finances in 2 years?
No, that was sleep.
Yeah. So, I mean, anyway, that's one of the many reasons that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So anyway, so these banks wind up having a lot more in their deposits than they used to.
Okay.
So here's the thing about banks, and this is why he was saying, you don't understand how banks work. All right. So I don't know if you have a banking account, savings account, or checking account.
I do have an account.
But if you do,
more or less the same amount in it.
Yeah.
Didn't triple or anything.
If you do, you will find, for example, that the interest rate that the bank pays you to put your money there isn't very high.
Right. Although
it's fairly low. It's been like, 0.5%, 2% at most.
Yeah, like
that's
in
what
the
it's
checking
been.
account.
And that's what
zero in checking.
These banks were paying out to their customers. Now, they take that money that they get from you. Mm-hmm. You are, in effect, loaning them your money.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And getting 2% on it for the pleasure of doing so. They take the money, and they, in turn, loan it out to other people at a higher rate.
That's banks.
7% maybe. So for 7%, I'll give you money you could start up your business. Where did the money come from? Kagro.
Yeah.
I'm paying him too,
but
I'm charging you 7. I'm going to make money.
Yeah. What's amazing is, I mean, I'm an investor in Silicon Valley startups, and I didn't even know it. I'm not getting anything.
Right. So they go along. Now a whole bunch more money gets put into your bank. And you decide that, I can't lend it out as fast as it's coming in. So I'm going to buy some long-term bonds, because long-term bonds pay rates that are attractive to me. And if I could hold them to maturity, I'll get a lot of money for it.
Yeah, all right.
And that's their business. And so a lot of banks do that, and that's okay, as long as you don't go crazy about it. But if you put all your money in long-term vehicles like this, then if you, Kagro X, decide to take your money out of the bank because interest rates are rising and you decide that getting 0.23% on your banking account isn't very good. There's another bank over there that I could get 3% or 1.5%, still more than. So I'm going to pull my money out. Or I don't like your bank, or I'm worried about your bank. I'm going to pull my money out. So the bank has to have enough money to give all the customers their money back if there's a run on the bank like in Mary Poppins.
Right.
But they can't do that if they own all these long-term vehicles that they can't easily get rid of.
Mm-hmm. Or they've loaned it to somebody. Any of those things.
Yeah, so if they can't get the money back right away, they're in trouble. And basically, that's what happened to SVB.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, the Fed stepped in and said, we know
that's what they do.
That SVB has problems. We want to prevent this issue from happening in other banks because a whole bunch of other banks have this issue. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell everybody publicly SVB's depositors would be made whole, so don't worry. Don't pull your money out of the bank. Mm-hmm. The other bank, this different bank, maybe First Republic Bank, the one that goes golfing instead of going to competitive cycling for recreation. Don't pull your money out. But if you do, we'll tell these other banks, don't worry, we'll lend you the money to cover what you have to pay when you give your customers money back. It's just that. We will replace Kagro X's deposit, which we're paying, let's pretend it's 2%. We'll give you the money from the federal government, but you're going to have to pay us 5%. But you can have as much as you want, unlimited.
All right.
So you'll have unlimited funds
take billions
to pay Kagro if he wants to pull his money out. But now, remember the bank's core business, now they have to pay the government 5%, and they're charging their startup 7%. Mm-hmm. So the difference between what they used to give you and then charge versus what they have to give the government and then charge is narrowed. Therefore, they're less profitable.
Oh, no. Less
Following
golf.
this?
Yes.
And if they're less profitable, their stock's going to fall.
Right.
And if their stock's going to fall, people start worrying about the bank. And if people start worrying about the bank, more people may want to pull their money. You see where I'm going with this?
Yep. Yeah.
That's where we are today. That's
right.
why the federal government stepping in and preventing failure has stopped a complete cascade of everything falling apart, but hasn't fixed the problem by making the problem go away.
And people still want
Everybody
it to
knows
cascade
that if
somehow.
you follow the federal government's way of doing things, the banks will be stable and they'll be solvent, but they'll be worthless. Not worthless, but they'll be worth less than they were.
Okay.
And so if you are somebody who deals in bank stocks, this is important to you, and it will change your opinion of how you rate the bank and how the bank stock will be doing. And then in context, that will be reported out to the public, and then you'll hear that this bank is in trouble because their stock is falling, without the explanation of what's going on, which we just gave you.
Right. Their stock is falling because of how guaranteed their deposits are.
Yeah.
Okay, so then don't take your money out. Yeah,
the stock is falling because they're
sell
stable.
your shares if you want, but but to leave your money where it is sell your shares and put the money in the bank, and you'll fix the problem. Actually,
right. Now, again, you have to understand. This is like me, a non-lawyer, explaining the law. I'm a non-finance person, and I'm trying to explain finance. And what I'm doing by trying to explain finance is talk it through, so I myself have some idea of what's going on.
Yes.
I'm just doing it live,
right? And
like Bill O'Reilly.
We have the patient audience not texting us to say, no, it's not the federal government per se. It's although who knows? I don't know. In this case, it may be the federal government. It's not. Is it the Federal Reserve, which is not actually supposedly? It's like quasi-governmental. You learn in school.
It's fund that the bank set up by being charged that the feds manage.
Okay. So so that makes the difference between people saying, well, they're using taxpayer money to the
right.
People
So it's a bailout, but it's not a bailout like 2009.
Right, and it's money that the banks paid in. Of course, banks are taxpayers, I guess. Banks are people, my friend, and they pay taxes too, and they need
they have portfolios full of loans.
Garbage, usually.
Actually.
Yeah, right.
Among other things.
Well,
but that's basically the setup as to what's going on right now, and so. What you're trying to figure out is, on the one hand,
what am I trying to figure
what
out?
does this mean to all those people who have investments in the stock market versus what does this mean to average, everyday, ordinary Americans? Well, you may not be a stockholder, or you may be, but you may work for a company and you're on payroll. And if your company has money in these banks, in order to meet payroll, these banks have to be solvent, and that's basically how it affects you. And that's one of the reasons why, besides not wanting to see this become contagious, to contain the contagion.
Yeah, you don't like those.
That's why the federal government intervened.
All right. Yeah, the thing that's still unexplained to me, and I think basically, what you get when you ask the experts is a lot of hand waving. Is all right. So I'm just a regular person, and I don't have a tremendous amount of money, and it doesn't bother me when I find out. I don't pay attention when I go to the bank to open up a account, and they say your deposits are insured by the FDIC. That's good, up to $250,000, and I say, well, great, there will never be a problem.
Yeah, it's not going to be a problem for my $45.
Yeah. So I guess the big question on everybody's mind is still so. There are a lot of people who put more money than that in the bank, and a lot of people have more money than that. And I guess you were supposed to spread it around, maybe, which would be good for stability of banks
That's one way
in general.
to do it.
But instead, people put it all in there, and then the bank has trouble, and then they say, "Well, I have $1 million in there. What happens to the other $750,000?" And now they say, "Yeah, you know what? That's insured too." Oh.
Well, because you may have used your $1 million to meet payroll every Tuesday.
Yeah, maybe. I guess you got to have it in a bank somewhere.
And the other part of the problem is, look, I know that the FDIC only insures things up to $250,000, but I'm a small business with $1 million payroll, and I got to put it somewhere.
Big,
and I'm in San Francisco, And I know those SVB people over there sort of are like weird, and they have wine parties, and they don't wear ties.
Right, but
when they go on recreational junctures, they ride bicycles. That's not for me. I want to play golf and go with an old style white collar,
a tie, right.
A tie and suit kind of bank. So I'll go with First Republic. And the reason that I'm putting my more than $250,000 in this bank is they have such a good reputation, and they're sort of conservative, and I trust them, and I don't think they're going to fail. And so people think that way.
I mean, I guess so.
And that's why they do it.
And I imagine it would be enormously.
I'm not taking a risk. I'm not putting it in that SVB bank. Who knows about that?
Those guys are crazy.
Those guys are crazy. I'll put it in like a real bank.
Yeah. I guess maybe
which has been around for 2 years less than
around
SVB,
that much.
you know?
Right. I mean, if you have $1 million worth of checks that have to go out, you can't be writing them on 4 different accounts all the time, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
But still, yeah, I do wonder about that. And it's kind of like, well, if you deposit enough that FDIC insurance covers you, I understand that. If you have more than that, I don't know. You should expect that there's going to be some problems. But I guess you're not allowed to do that.
Right. The other side of the coin is that if you have bank managers who don't manage well, you're going to put everybody else's money at risk. So, do you know what a hedge fund is?
You know what? Not really.
It's basically a private group of people who have a money manager to manage their private money, and they take a lot of risks.
Yes.
They're not a bank. But the old 2008 joke is the difference between a hedge fund and a bank is that the hedge fund is better capitalized.
Right? Yeah, it usually is. Okay. Yeah, I've never really entirely understood them, but we knew enough about them to know, okay, well, we know what sorts of people
but they're for rich
are involved in one. Yeah, right.
And we know what the leaders of these funds are like politically.
Yes, that's true, too. Seems to be the same everywhere. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. While we were on break, I took all the content of the show for this next segment and invested it at 7% return in long-term bonds, and now you're all going to have to text us something new to talk about.
Okay, we're no longer woke.
Right. That's good. Phew. Thank God. All right, time to go play golf. So did my
segment. So let me just finish up here with Semaphore, which sort of describes in a nutshell the first half hour in case you wanted a shorter version.
Yeah, what happened?
The efforts announced Sunday night to shore up the banking system should keep troubled regional lenders afloat for now by offering them cash to give to panicked depositors, but it will leave them far less profitable, almost ensuring they'll eventually need to be sold to the giants. See, here's part of the fallout.
That was the plan all along, though.
If you don't like the idea that banking is consolidated with J.P. Morgan, Chase Bank of America, Wells Fargo, the company,
yes,
the single company,
right,
it will leave them far less profitable, almost ensuring they'll eventually need to be sold to giants. So as depositors pull their money, banks can take bonds they own, the long-term stuff, to the Fed, and in return get the money they need to meet those withdrawals, We described that in the last half hour. But the government hasn't explicitly guaranteed that deposits over the $250 per customer insurance cap are safe at other lenders. In other words, the government's agreeing to fund a bank run.
Oh, yeah. All right. Actually, that's not a bad way of describing it, actually.
Banks profit on the gap between the interest they pay depositors and other creditors and the interest they collect from the people they lend to. So the firms under the most pressure, First Republic, Western Alliance, Utah-based Zions Bank, founded by Brigham Young, were paying between 0.23 and 2% in interest on their deposits. I wasn't making up those money numbers. That's what they are.
Yeah.
If these deposits continue to flee, they'll be replacing them with government funds charging 5%. So replacing cheap deposits with more expensive deposits will narrow, or in some cases entirely close, the profit gap. Profit will evaporate, the lender's shares will trade at steep discounts, then they'll be bought up by the big banks. So that may be the end result of what happens. So on the one hand, you may say, well, why didn't SVB just get bought up by one of the big banks? And the answer is because the feds wouldn't let them.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
First they wanted to stabilize it, and they didn't let the big banks start doing bidding on them over the weekend.
Okay.
They only opened up that possibility Monday.
Yeah, well,
and so and by then, they had been stabilized, so they weren't to be picked up as cheap. So it's not clear that the feds wanted the big banks to snap up all the medium-sized banks.
Okay.
But in the end, that's what's going to happen.
Yes, I was thinking more long-term than just the weekend. But my guess is, I don't know, it's been my experience that when you start a bank, just out of nowhere, if you're not, Brigham Young or didn't start the bank back in the 1800s, that's very often the whole idea is, well, I'll start a small regional bank and I'll be a banker for a while and that will pay my bills. And then I will retire when a giant buys me. That's the plan. That's like the exit plan for how I'm starting a bank so that in 25 years I can sell the bank for an enormous profit. And the problem here is that if they are borrowing at 5% to pay off the people who were getting 2% and the profit margin evaporates and my stock price falls, when I get bought out by a giant, I won't be a billionaire. I'll be a millionaire. That's bad. And that worries, I guess, the bank ownership in all of this. But along the way, there's the other problem of I own a small business and I can't make payroll. Where's my money?
Yeah. And people who work for that small business are like regular people. So, all of it is wrapped in with everything else. And
some of them might
basically
be drag
the why
queens,
of
so it's
why
okay.
is it happening? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? This is why it's happening.
Could be.
So let's change subjects because, you have exhausted everything I know about finance.
Okay. I think I'm at the end myself. What else? What else don't we know about?
Well, there's France.
Okay.
Did you know that in France?
I don't know anything.
There is a France.
True. I've seen it.
People, I was reminded, who is that state representative who said there's no such thing as poverty, people aren't poor. I haven't met any hungry people.
Oh, I don't know.
That was in the news recently.
Yeah? Oh, my God.
And the response to that is, listen, I've never been to France. You probably haven't either. Does that mean France doesn't exist because you haven't seen it?
Nobody goes to France anymore. Yeah, I don't know.
It's too crowded. So the whole idea is France exists. And in France,
it's there.
You get to retire at age 62.
Oh, sacre bleu.
Well, you did,
I think.
Anyway.
Oh, is that changing?
Macron wants to raise the retirement age to 64.
Okay.
That may seem low by American standards.
It is.
But it is what it is in France.
Well, that sounds pretty good
today,
to me, actually.
The Assembly gets to vote on this proposal.
62 to 64?
62 to 64.
All right. It's not huge, but if you're 60...
As the Washington Post says, the proposal has been opposed by unions and two-thirds of the French public, prompting 8 days of nationwide protests and strikes. And there's been no signs of Macron backing down. But the French leader, who's 10 months into his second five-year term, lacks an absolute parliamentary majority, and lawmakers' approval of his plans is far from certain. Here's where it gets interesting. So the upper house of parliament, the Senate, already passed it this morning. But the lower assembly, which is more powerful, is supposed to vote on the bill later today. Macron would probably need some right-leaning parts of the assembly to vote for it, but they're populists, and it's not clear that they will. And here's where it gets even more interesting. There are some obscure rules, and I've read some stuff, and I'm certainly far from being an expert on this, but apparently Macron's government can enforce it anyway by fiat, but not if the assembly votes no.
Okay.
So he could do it in the next few hours.
Oh, well.
And then if the assembly votes no, he can't do it after that.
Better start doing it. They're not getting any younger.
Interesting
That's
things
the whole
may
point.
happen today is what I'm trying to tell you. And it's worth watching. We don't know how that's going to work out.
All right. 64.
Maybe he has the votes, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he decides not to take a vote if he doesn't have the votes. That's something Nancy Pelosi was really good at. Don't put something on the floor if you don't have the votes.
Yes, that's
Maybe
true.
he'll raise the age anyway. Maybe he won't. Maybe he'll raise the age but not have a vote. We'll see how that goes over with the French public. A lot of interesting possibilities there.
Okay. And, well, yeah. So a big change. And look, you're lucky it's not 72. And
Right.
It's merely
Macron has
72.
been pushing for changes for the country's pension system since he was elected in 2017 as a way to shore up the financial position of a graying society and keep France competitive. France has a lower minimum retirement age than many of its European neighbors, where laws similar to the one proposed by Macron have prompted less divisive debates. Germany is preparing to increase in their retirement age from 65 to 67.
90. The Germans
with little
go for it.
backlash.
All right.
And life expectancy in France has increased by around 3 years over the past 2 decades. That's part of why he wants to do it.
Okay. Look, you're 3 years longer. You can. Has it? Okay. Well, good for them. Whereas life expectancy here in the United States is dropping.
Right. Opponents of an increase counter that the advantages of workers are the result of hard-won battles with consecutive governments and touch the core of the country's national identity.
Oh, well. Maybe.
Working conditions in France have deteriorated significantly over the past decades, they say, and the fierce resistance is also driven by a growing disconnect between the French and their attachment to their jobs. Instead of raising the retirement age, the government should increase salaries and address precarious working conditions so you can afford to retire.
All right.
Interesting.
Complex situation in France, but as you know, if anything happens, they'll strike, which is why things happen.
Yeah. So there's some strikes ending in the UK, by the way. I think the nurses and ambulance strike is going to be over today because I think they finally settled with Rishi Sunak and the Conservative government.
Okay.
So we'll see how that goes over. Meanwhile, back here in the United States, there's a poll out. I guess this might be Quinnipiac. I'm not sure.
How many pollouts does it take?
Yeah, new polling from Quinnipiac University published Wednesday indicates that most Americans think that Fox should lose their lawsuit. That's true of nearly all Democrats, unsurprisingly.
Yeah, sure.
But it's also true of 2 out of 5 Republicans, with fewer than half of those in the party thinking the network shouldn't be held accountable.
Okay. I just need 12 people to think so.
Right. So after Trump lost his reelection bid, and this is a write-up by Philip Pump in the Washington Post, the network called Arizona for Joe Biden, which it shouldn't have because it was the right call, even though it was the wrong time to make it. Then it called the election for Biden, which it should have, and this infuriated a viewership that was hearing elsewhere that Trump had actually won. So we know about the whole history of that lawsuit. And the thing is, the results should be considered in the context of the question itself, which summarized the case against Fox News. The network will endeavor to contextualize its actions in the post-2020 election as a threat to First Amendment protections for the press. And that's a compelling argument to other media. We are warier of defamation claims than Americans in general, recognizing how such lawsuits could be used against us. But most media outlets also refrain from sharing claims they know to be false. In other words, we're likely at less risk of seeing defamation suits clear the higher bar that applies to media outlets because, like, we tell the truth and they don't. Probably disadvantageous for Fox News that this is being litigated publicly. The claims about Dominion's voting machines have a much smaller universe of adherents than they did in late 2020. It used to be a central part of the election fraud, theorizing that the election was stolen because Dominion changed votes. Now people don't really think that. It's just like a vibe. The election was stolen because we don't like Democrats and we don't trust them, basically. And so that's really hard to disprove because you can't disprove that I dislike Democrats. And you can't disprove that I don't trust them. And since those two things are true, then obviously the election was stolen. It just follows logically. It's science.
I am all right. I'm confused, but okay.
So that's why you can't deal with the rest. But most people, are understanding of the facts that the facts aren't the facts, right? So like they say, okay, fine. Well, if Fox lied to us, they shouldn't lie, and therefore you should, pay a price.
Okay, that's cool. And I mentioned yesterday there's another suit coming down the pike as well as Smartmatic. I don't know whether they were conducting their own investigation and research, or they just read what was happening in Dominion and said we should do this because they've been accused similarly.
Yeah, so that's coming down the pike as well, and there's some other articles out there basically saying Rupert Murdoch may have miscalculated and he may have guessed wrong, and it may be costing him a lot of money. And no, Fox isn't necessarily going to get away with everything the way they normally do. And so the trouble with the law is an ass, and it just takes a long time to get stuff done, even if the right thing eventually is done. Justice delayed, justice denied, all that sort of stuff. But eventually, some of this stuff does catch up to you. Here's an example of stuff catching up to you. There's this fellow, Steve Bannon, who tried to scam his followers and build a wall that never got built. And he got indicted for it, and he got convicted for it, and then he got pardoned for it.
Yeah.
He had a partner. I don't know if you remember, but when Steve Bannon was picked up for all of this, he was on the yacht of Go Wenwei, who is a now fugitive and arrested Chinese expat financier.
And again, now we've learned you've checked the pronunciation of this name. I think I've had it wrong the whole time. I've always said Go Wengi because that's
how
the way
it's
written in English.
Go Wenwei is how it's pronounced.
How you actually write his name. Go
at least in
Wenwei.
Taiwan.
Okay. Well, they're pretty.
But again,
close to
apologies
China.
to actual, natural, and native Chinese speakers.
Forget it.
I have a history of mangling names, even when I try to learn, and I do try to learn in advance of the show how to pronounce something.
Good for
and
you.
I don't always get it right, but I believe how it's pronounced.
I try to learn after the show, which is worse. But Go Wenwei, okay, yes. So
anyway,
he's arrested.
He was arrested this morning,
Excellent.
according to Marcy Wheeler, on a sweeping indictment charging $1 billion conspiracy, 4 sets of wire and security fraud charges, each tied to a particular business, as well as any other money laundering charges.
Mm-hmm.
And it's unclear. This happened yesterday, and the exact scope of it is unclear. But he says he's bankrupt, but he found $75,000 to support CPAC.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now he's bankrupt. That was my last $75,000.
Apparently.
The bankrupt guy arrested on a yacht.
Right.
Sure.
And, Bannon used some of this money to do the Hunter Biden stuff.
Yes.
So it's all, sort of mixed up together. According to Reuters, U.S. charges exiled Chinese businessman Go Wenwei with $1 billion in fraud. Mm-hmm. Go with help from longtime financial advisor Qin Ming Jie, cheated thousands of followers since 2018 by promising outsized investment returns.
Wow,
but diverting much of the money to fund lavish lifestyles for himself and his family.
Well, that's the first one to do that, so that's very brilliant of him. I've never heard
alleged
of
improper purchases included a $37 million yacht, famous now, of course. $50,000 square foot mansion in northern New Jersey.
Wow.
A $3.5 million Ferrari for Go's son. A $62,000 TV.
Well, I have one of those. That's not so big.
Yeah, that TV is so expensive that when you watch shows, they end the way you want them to.
Come over and watch the real Sopranos ending.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And 230. I watched the Yankees game, and they keep winning. I don't know. And two $36,000 mattresses.
Wow. Okay.
When we go to the mattress, we go to the mattress. Let me tell you.
Boy,
Joe, 52, was charged with 11 criminal counts, including securities fraud, wire fraud, concealment, and money laundering after lining his pockets with the money he stole. So, yeah, I can see why he's a friend of Steve Bannon's.
Yeah, obviously. And if he hurries and gets to France, he can retire in 10 years.
Go, who's used other names like Ho Wan Kwok and Miles Kwok, has been a business associate of Bannon who was arrested in a fraud case in August 2020 while aboard the yacht, the Lady May. Trump pardoned Bannon, but Bannon is not accused of wrongdoing in this particular case.
Right, and Trump is not president to pardon this guy either, and I'm not certain whether he would. He's been a controversial figure for a long time. The Chinese have been asking for his extradition since forever. Now he's arrested. We'll see what happens to him.
Yeah.
Has he tried here?
That same Quinnipiac University poll, by the way, which was released yesterday, shows Trump inching higher in the GOP primary. Nearly half of Americans would support a ban on TikTok.
Oh, are we angry with TikTok?
Well, I mean, TikTok is a Chinese spy company, according to some in the federal government.
Yeah, but is that bad? Are we angry about that?
Well, we don't like China.
Okay. We gave them delicious chocolate cake.
Even those who apologize for Russia in the Republican Party don't like China.
Yeah, so they say.
You need a scorecard to figure out what your allegiances are these days, and that's actually one of the big stories we have to cover, which is to say that Ron DeSantis, and we talked about it yesterday, coming out to try to cover for Putin, actually got quite a large amount of blowback from the Republican Party regulars.
Good. Right.
Surprisingly. Because they weren't muted about it. They didn't do I haven't read it. I haven't seen what he said. They read it. They saw it. They had a lot to say about it.
All right.
But in the meantime, in an early look at the 2024 Republican presidential primary, remembering that we do not have a national primary, we have 50 or more regional elections, 46% of Republican and Republican-leaning voters support Trump. 32% support DeSantis, who's seen as a potential candidate. I think DeSantis is going to fade because I think DeSantis is not ready for prime time. He's only now learning how to kiss babies. We learned that yesterday.
Yeah, hasn't kissed them yet. Just touched them, I think.
Well, that's bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah. And in this atmosphere...
Don't touch the babies, okay?
Really? Yeah, hands off.
And in fact, that's what Trump is accusing DeSantis of.
Hey, good.
Former United Nations ambassador and South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley receives 5%. Of the remaining 12 listed, no one tops 3. That includes Glenn Youngkin. Mm-hmm. Trump has widened his lead over DeSantis. In the last poll, Trump led 42-36. There's no evidence DeSantis is gaining traction. No matter how favorably he gets written up by the Washington press,
yeah, and we don't
there's
know why
no evidence that DeSantis is gaining traction. There is evidence that people want to listen to him, tolerate him, aren't rejecting him outright. Republicans might well approve of the stuff he's doing in Florida, but there's no evidence he's gaining traction against Trump. That's just what the situation is right now.
All right. I mean, I think we can grasp that.
So this is from Politico. Wanted, a GOP presidential contender who supports Ukraine.
Wanted by Ukraine anyway, yeah.
Wanted by Republicans. Senate Republicans are dinging frontrunners Trump and DeSantis for not supporting Ukraine, calling for leaders who embrace a more Reagan-esque foreign policy. I want a Ronald Reagan when it comes to national security. I want peace through strength, said John Cornyn. He prefers a candidate who won't kowtow to the isolationist wing of the Republican Party, which is what he's calling it.
All right.
At the moment, GOP senators say they're overwhelmingly in favor of still supplying Ukraine with lethal aid, arguing it's a deterrent against both Russian President Vladimir Putin and China.
No.
And some of these Republicans want a presidential nominee who shares their point of view, potentially putting these senators at odds with their party's conservative base, provided they concur with Trump and DeSantis. Mm-hmm. So this is, again, Republican Senate versus Republican House. And arguably, the Republican House is obnoxious and
disliked,
shallow, callow, immature.
Right.
nonetheless reflects the Republican base better than the Senate does.
Yeah, sure it does.
So what do you do with that? The Senate Republicans' long hawkish identity on foreign policy has certainly grown more diverse in recent years. Most of them have overwhelmingly supported helping Ukraine. Even a fresh infusion of new GOP senators, including Ukraine skeptics like J.D. Vance, has not significantly shifted the balance of the 49-member conference. And Vance freely admits that many of his colleagues don't see eye to eye with him. His choice, Trump or DeSantis. The weight of public opinion within the party is on our side, and it's shifting in our direction. And I think the fact that you have the two people leading on this issue is a good sign, Vance said. Trump and DeSantis together are far more skeptical of our posture towards Ukraine than Senate Republicans. Now, one of the things that makes this so complicated is the reason that people like Vance and the Republican base are skeptical is a good reason.
Okay. I'm glad there's one.
W invaded Iraq under false pretenses. That's where this started.
Oh, that is interesting and complicated. I mean, we remember that, of course, but imagine that. I don't think I thought at the time what kind of impact that could have on Republicans later.
That's what led to all of this. That's why they don't trust the Republican establishment. Guess what? They're right to do that.
Yeah. Well, you know how you should vote if you feel
W
that way.
terms. W era terms.
Yeah.
This is what Don Rumsfeld might have called a known.
Oh. Was it known at the time?
Not at the time, but now it's a known.
It is now.
Why the Republican base hates the Republican establishment. There's known unknowns. We're not really sure how the Republican base reacts to the Republican establishment when it comes to saving banks. And there's unknown unknowns. Like, we don't know how the Republican base is going to react to anything sane anymore. But one of the things we do know is that the Republican base doesn't like the Republican establishment because of the Iraq War. Same reason we don't like them.
Oh, interesting. Yes. I mean, given that I would think, we were always told
I only like to bring up interesting things.
Well, that's a good idea. I like that approach.
I'll try doing that from now on.
All right. Yeah. You begin that next week. This is like, you would think, I don't know. I was always under the impression, or maybe people were trying to give me the impression that the same people would support, say, the invasion of Iran at the drop of a hat, but maybe not. Or maybe they might
support the invasion of China.
Right. Well,
but a lot of that's
would be
racist.
So helpful. That would really go great. Yes, they are weird and they switch directions all the time and they're gimmitarians at heart. So you never know what they're going to end up supporting.
That's the known unknown.
I guess that's it, right? If you tell them a country is woke, they'll invade.
We know they're gimmitarians, but we don't know what that means.
Right. we are them. We just don't understand it.
How are they going to react to any given thing, given that they're gimmitarians? We don't know.
Yeah, we have to find out whether, no. Is it going to put money in their pocket or make them feel like they're beating up on people they don't like? Then they'll go for it. All right. Well, that is interesting, and it's a little awkward. But okay. So now they have to fight this out.
Yeah, I didn't have this at my fingertips, but I saw on Twitter flash before me. And the reason I still use the bird side is because you find these little insights that I just found interesting. Yes. Is that you could actually correlate opposition to the Iraq War based on how many constituents went over there to fight. If you were from a town that sent a lot of people over to Iraq, you were more likely to not be real keen these days.
These days. That's the important part. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it took a while.
Because back then, when they were, at the time that all the people in your neighborhood were going, you were rabidly, very often, pro-war and angry with people who were skeptical of it because the people you knew were over there. And now that they are either some of them back or others of them not, now it's a bad idea.
This should come as no surprise for those of us from Vietnam era.
Right. Okay.
These things happen. But
that's the way
it's a lot of that is fueling the Republican-based resentment with the Senate establishment. Because the Republican establishment in the House isn't much of an establishment at all.
Yeah.
It's not leadership. It's not grown-ups. I don't know what to call them. But they have a 4-vote majority. They're afraid of their base, and basically they are the base.
They're the SVB bank in all of this, and the First Republic guys are over in the Senate.
Pretty much.
Yeah. except they're not, none of them could ride a bike. I doubt very much that they could manage it. But still, yeah, difference in style. Same business, difference in style. It's an interesting way of thinking about it, even if it's a terrible analogy.
Right. Another telling example, says Politico, on the widespread position of Senate Republicans, John Kennedy from Louisiana, who often aligns with his party's conservative wing in a folksy way, at a recent party lunch, he argued in favor of funding Kyiv, even while breaking from Biden's overall management of the conflict. Right? I want to do everything Biden's doing. I just don't want to give Biden credit for it.
Okay, yes. Right.
I've never viewed Ukrainian aid as charity, is the exact quote. I viewed it as an act of self-preservation.
All right.
Now, polling released this week from Gallup found that 62% of Republicans rate the war between Russia and Ukraine as a critical threat to U.S. interests, an increase of 6 points since 2022. And a higher level of GOP buy-in than among Democrats and independents. Romney said Trump and DeSantis positions aren't the prevailing view, apparently, with the Republican voters either. So, interesting dynamics here. One can argue, based on this poll, that, once again, the Republican House is basically wrong about everything. Wrong about the substance, wrong about the politics, wrong in their judgment. They're just wrong.
Yeah. But it is an interesting and complex issue that, once again, I'm worried whether the polling, again, will be weird and wonky in the ways that it was. It makes me think of the polling on Affordable Care Act when there was, opposition growing to it. But, there's opposition. It's capturing opposition from people who thought it didn't go far enough. You used to tell us that all the time. And I'm wondering now whether the opposition on two different ends of the political spectrum, either skepticism about the war or support for Ukraine, for that matter, is coming from two very different pockets for slightly different reasons.
Well, you can couch it in a whole lot of different ways.
You can measure it.
What one group of Republicans say, I'm only skeptical about support for Ukraine because I want Europe to do more. Europe's doing a lot.
Yeah. Right, but they were told by the last president that they weren't, so it's all right. Well, this is interesting and complex, and we'll see how they're going to have to figure out at some point, I guess. Or maybe they don't have to figure out where the Republican Party stands. They skipped the platform last time. Maybe they'll skip it again.
I have a feeling they will.
Okay. I guess they won't be able to settle it anyway.
But now we know why.
Yes, and we have polling to prove it. All right. Thanks, Greg. That's it. We'll see you next week.
Yes, on Monday we'll have something interesting.
All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So I'm kind of fascinated to see what is involved in the stories of the arrest here of, and I got to go check the pronunciation again, Go Wen Wei. We might, let me read what Empty Wheel has to say about it, although I always want to be cautious about diving into the Empty Wheel description of events because it will be referencing 10,000 other things that only she's written about. And if you're not reading every day, you might not know exactly what's going on, but I think it's a good place to start. Anything Bannon connected, you really have to. It's a good idea to check whether and see what you're missing from the mainstream coverage. Let's see though. Steve Bannon's sometime partner, Go Wen Wei, was arrested this morning on a sweeping indictment charging a $1 billion conspiracy, 4 sets of wire and security fraud charges, each tied to a particular business, as well as other money laundering charges. And by the way, this opens the door to go back to the Pras Michel Fuji's story, because he was bound up with this guy too, not working with him, but rather, I guess, working with another figure, Joe Low from 1MDB, who was lobbying, presumably on behalf of the Chinese government, looking for American help arresting, capturing, and extraditing Go Wen Wei back to China. So now he's in custody, I guess. I don't know. I mean, who knows whether he was released already, and whether he'll disappear if they do release him on bond, or what sort of bond you would want for an international fugitive billionaire. But yeah, all these things are, and now it brings us back to this other interesting thing of bad guy versus bad guy, essentially happening here, and no sides to be taken in all of this, and it's confusing and weird and fascinating all at the same time. So let's see. It will take time for me, Marcy says, at least, to understand the full scope of the alleged behavior, which means it's really beyond the pale because, and you know how much we hate that expression. If she doesn't already understand it, it must be extraordinarily complex. But for now, know that SDNY, the Southern District of New York, started seizing some of the proceeds of this fraud last year and will now move to seize the yacht on which Bannon was arrested for his own fraud indictment, as well as some $36,000 mattresses that bought with the proceeds of his alleged fraud. I should hope so. No one should ever just buy $36,000 mattresses straight up, in my opinion. An update provided here. Dave Weigel reminds that Go found $75,000 to support CPAC. Greg mentioned that, in spite of his claimed bankruptcy. And then there is a excerpt, I guess, from Weigel's write-up at Semaphore, which reads, and the new federal state of China declared 3 years ago by Steve Bannon and exiled businessman Go Wenwei, made its first CPAC appearance with a $75,000 sponsorship and 2 high-tech booths where volunteers handed out leaflets and explained why the battle to destroy the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, had to be won in America, which is probably a lot easier to win it here in America than it would be in China, but it would involve shooting, I imagine, in China, whereas here in the United States, it's just yelling a lot and printing out flyers and handing out leaflets at CPAC, I guess. That's interesting. So they declared themselves a new federal state of China. So in addition to the breakaway republic, as the Chinese describe Taiwan, there's also, we're starting a new China entirely over here in the United States. Yeah, that's the benefit of this China is it's here in the United States, as opposed to so far away like the other China is. Well, anyway, it says, that isn't hyperbole, says Dave Weigel here. The elimination of the Chinese Communist Party is essential in breaking the shackles of slavery imposed on the Chinese people, Bannon said at the 2020 ceremony launching the NFSC, New Federal State of China, whatever that means, launching it. And also in bringing about peace to the international community and all mankind. That sounds awesome. Go, citing Chinese culture, whatever that might mean in his mind, pricked his finger and signed the declaration with his blood. The Bannon-Wenwei partnership, do I have that right? Wenwei. Yeah, okay, I think so. I'm forgetting already. Burst into the headlines before the 2020 election when Bannon was arrested on Go's yacht on charges that were later superseded by a pardon from President Trump. Go declared bankruptcy last year, claiming that his wealth had dwindled to less than $100,000, but their flashy CPAC presentation, including some advocates who described fleeing China after the 1989 massacre at Tiananmen Square, found a receptive audience and rhymed with what was happening on the main stage. So it's a little bit iffy as to whether or not it's always iffy about whether or not these people who have vast amounts of money are really bankrupt, or rather just hiding their assets so that it's harder for whatever government is arresting them to seize those assets. Anyway, that's pretty interesting. Other stories, I don't know whether it's really, should we be going back to, maybe tomorrow is a good day to go back to the Pras Michel story. I don't know. I mentioned that, or did I mention? I'm not really sure. What's a good segue for this? There's a couple of different directions we could go in. How about this? Because we were talking about yachts, I'll try this one, which is not really a great segue, but it's here. Thanks to my brother Mark for sending this one on. George Santos did another thing, and it involves a yacht. The New York Times reports under the headline, Sold, yacht with a waterfall. I don't really know what that means, but I'm sure we'll find out. Price, $19 million. Broker, George Santos. Yeah. How do you like that? I think he said he was involved in this business, which is the business of, I don't know, connecting rich people with one another when they wanted to do rich people things. That's what he claimed his job was just before being elected to Congress. So it says here, right in the subheader, just before his House election, Mr. Santos helped two of his largest donors reach a private deal on a $19 million boat, mixing his political and personal interests. That's sort of interesting. Let's see whether that creates any sort of legal or ethical problem here. Rebecca Davis O'Brien and William K. Rashbaum will attempt to answer that question. A $19 million luxury yacht deal brokered by Representative George Santos between two of his wealthy donors has captured the attention of federal and state authorities investigating the congressman's campaign finances and personal business dealings. The sale, which has not been previously reported, is one of about a dozen leads being pursued by the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn, and the Nassau County District Attorney's Office. People familiar with the case said, and you know who those people are. Prosecutors and FBI agents have sought in recent weeks to question the new owner of the 141-foot super yacht, and his name is Raymond Tantillo, a Long Island auto dealer. And they want to question him about the boat and his dealings with Mr. Santos, including his campaign fundraising efforts. It's unclear so far whether this deal was brokered during the campaign before he was a representative-elect or after. But even so, it could raise issues if money that was being donated to his campaign was really only being donated because it was a kickback from sales of the yacht. I don't know. Let's go see what's going on here. Mr. Tantillo thought, unless he pronounces it with Tantillo, I mean, it is double L, but I'm guessing that he does not. Mr. Tantillo, and it might be Italian rather than Spanish. At any rate, bought a boat, that same boat, as a matter of fact, from Mayra Ruiz, a Republican donor in Miami. You know where that is, Miami. Mr. Santos negotiated the payment, $12.25 million up front, with $6.5 million more in installments, and advised the two on the logistics of turning over the yacht, according to a person familiar with the sale, which took place a few weeks before his election in November. Okay, so he hadn't quite been elected at that point. He was still working, I guess, as a private, although you probably should have, put your private work aside just to focus full-time on the campaign by November. But there you have it. It's not clear what laws, if any, may have been broken in the transaction. Several election law experts said that if the sale was designed to inject money into Mr. Santos's campaign, it may be in violation of federal law governing caps on campaign contributions. It could also be illegal if Mr. Santos tied any commission he received on the sale to future or previous donations. But even if Mr. Santos broke no laws, the deal serves as further evidence of an emerging narrative given by people in his political orbit that Mr. Santos seemed to use his campaign not only to win elected office, but also as a networking exercise to ingratiate himself with rich donors and enrich himself from those contacts. Mr. Santos has denied wrongdoing. Joe Murray, a lawyer representing Mr. Santos in potential criminal matters, declined to comment, as did spokesmen from the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn, and the Nassau County District Attorney, who is working with federal authorities on the investigation. Mr. Santos's campaign finances and personal business dealings have been under scrutiny following revelations by the New York Times in December that Mr. Santos had fabricated or embellished most of his resume. The Times has since reported on curious omissions in his campaign filings, an unregistered fund connected to him, and other irregularities in his finances. A central mystery is Mr. Santos's sudden unexplained jump in income, where he got the money to loan himself roughly $700,000 over the course of his 2022 campaign. During his first bid for Congress in 2020, he reported an income of $55,000. 2 years later, he reported a $750,000 salary and over $1 million in dividends from his company, the Florida-based DeVolder organization, which Santos described as a capital introduction business. And that makes a certain amount of sense in terms of explaining how he's tied up in this yacht business, introducing the capital that Raymond Tantillo had to Mayra Ruiz, who was trying to sell her boat. And I guess the worry here is, was he really brokering the sales of boats, or was he really raising money for his campaign, or both, or did he mix the two? And did the sale of the boat did they pay above market prices or not? And so that it would boost the brokerage fee, and the brokerage fee, whatever it was, whether they artificially inflated the prices or not, if the brokerage fee was then just really, if it was understood that I'm letting you arrange this deal rather than somebody competent, so that you can take that money that you make in the quote unquote brokerage fee and use it to run for Congress and just loan it to yourself, inject it straight into the race. That's where I guess the lines get blurred, and people worry about whether or not this was a legal or ethical transaction. So let's see. Mr. Santos, a Republican, had said publicly that his company brokered deals between high net worth clients. In an interview with Semaphore in December, he sought to explain his work by saying that if a client wanted to sell a plane or a boat, yes, that's right, a plane or a boat, he would put that feeler out there among his contacts, adding that he had landed a couple of $1 million contracts. If you're looking at a $20 million yacht, which is, of course, what was happening here, he told Semaphore, my referral fee there can be anywhere between $200,000 and $400,000. And as it turns out, there was, in fact, a yacht worth nearly $20 million. In 2019, records show John H. Ruiz, a Miami lawyer and businessman, bought a super yacht made by the Italian yacht builder Mangusta. The yacht, which was listed at the time for 18 million euros, or $20 million, sleeps 12 guests and 7 crew, and featured an infinity pool, a waterfall. I'm not really sure how you, I guess like a water feature that recycles the water. Okay, a waterfall and an outdoor shower, which is really basically a waterfall, but with the water coming down in smaller drops and then draining away rather than being reused, I guess. You could just shower in the waterfall, really, if you wanted to, but that would be unhygienic, I think. It was called Namaste, a greeting in Hindi, and I guess familiar to yoga practitioners, right? So maybe that was going on. Mr. Ruiz, a Coral Gables lawyer who specializes in healthcare and malpractice claims, gained notoriety last year when he took his data analytics company public in a reverse merger with a special purpose acquisition company. Oh, we've learned about those, right? The company, MSP Recovery, briefly had a record-setting valuation of nearly $33 billion, making Mr. Ruiz a billionaire many times over. But the stock promptly plummeted when everybody realized it was just some jerk's malpractice practice that had been bought up. Anyway, stock plummeted to $1 a share, and in June of 2022, he and the firm's co-founder lent the company $113 million to plug a cash shortfall. See SVB Bank on that one. Mr. Ruiz did not donate to Mr. Santos's campaign, but his wife, Mayra, was a particularly generous donor or supporter. It says here, campaign finance records show that on March 31st, 2022, Mayra Ruiz gave $10,800 to Mr. Santos's joint fundraising committee. Later, she was among the first to give Mr. Santos money after he won the election. Mr. Santos has failed to disclose any of his DeVolder clients, but in December, the Tantillo Auto Group, Mr. Tantillo's network of car dealerships on Long Island, and 2 organizations tied to Mr. Ruiz's family were identified by the Daily Beast as DeVolder clients. The Daily Beast quoted Mayra Ruiz saying the family had hired DeVolder in early 2022, but did not provide more detail. Mrs. Ruiz, or Ms. as she's referred to here, Ms. Ruiz did not respond to requests for comment. Christine Lugo, a lawyer for Mr. Ruiz, said her client was not interested in making any statement other than the fact that he has already publicly disclosed that he does not know who George Santos is and has never contributed to his campaigns and has never done any business with him. But his wife knows him pretty good. That's weird. Mr. Santos, by many accounts, mingled campaign fundraising with personal business opportunities. Several donors have described encounters with Mr. Santos at fundraisers in which he would describe deals he could broker with other donors in industries including insurance and pharmaceuticals, or he would tell them about donors who were seeking to sell businesses or luxury items. It's interesting because I imagine to the layperson, and at that point George Santos was pretty much a layperson, you might wonder, well, yeah, you're there with rich people who are donors, that's true, and you're in your business, you match up rich people with one another for various transactions. Is that really that much of a problem? And I guess the answer is when you're talking about federal campaign finance, you're supposed to be very persnickety about these things and only be doing one thing or the other at any given time, especially if you're taking fees from all of this brokerage and then plowing your fees into the financing of your campaign. And it becomes less clear whether people are there giving you money because they support you for Congress or because they just want to buy that yacht. And, if it also happens to fund your run as a Republican, then fine. Or maybe, if they're buying and selling businesses or even luxury items for some reason, sometimes extraordinarily rich people think they can deduct those purchases on their taxes. And so if you're looking for a way to turn a tax deduction into a campaign contribution or to find a tax deduction for a campaign contribution, they're not tax deductible. But if you're trying to disguise it as something else, I know this money is actually going to get plowed into your campaign, but we'll call it a brokerage fee for buying a business, which would possibly be a tax deduction, a business expense. What a great way to finance a campaign, illegal way to finance a campaign for office with federal taxpayer subsidies. That would be problematic. Anyway, Mr. Santos would offer to bring people together with the implicit understanding that he would take a cut, they said. The pitches were often paired with requests for donations. None of the other potential arrangements described to the Times appear to have resulted in deals. Among the donors he courted, Mr. Santos seems to have grown close to Mr. Tantillo, according to people familiar with their relationship. Mr. Tantillo gave more than $17,000 to Mr. Santos's campaign and affiliated committees. His estranged wife is recorded as giving at least $5,000 more, as is another ex-wife. Contribution limits in New York congressional races in 2022 were slightly altered after a state court ruling scuttled an electoral map and forced an August primary. The Federal Election Commission held that candidates could raise additional funds, it notes here parenthetically. In August, Mr. Santos approached Mr. Tantillo with an offer to sell him the yacht. The agreement was hammered out in late September in Coral Gables, and Mr. Santos suggested moving the boat to a free trade zone at the port, the person said. How interesting is that? And so this is in September. It's getting pretty close to election time. It is common for boat sales to take place in a free trade zone before going overseas, often the Bahamas, and returning with a new owner, according to another person familiar with the sale and with the Miami port system. Don't immediately understand that, but it sounds like if you're buying it and reflagging it, it might make some sense to do the sale in a, quote, free trade zone for that reason. I don't know. I'm sure it saves on fees and taxes at some point. As negotiations progressed, Mr. Santos pressed Mr. Tantillo for additional donations and financial help for his campaign. And for other Republicans, as Election Day drew near, the person said, Mr. Tantillo did not provide additional funds. I have every reason to believe that Mr. Tantillo will not be charged for anything, including the purchase of a boat or campaign contributions, said Robert Curtis Gottlieb, a lawyer for Mr. Tantillo. At least one other large donor was asked for a major contribution weeks before the election, the Times has reported. After weeks of negotiations, Mr. Tantillo agreed in September of 2022 to buy the yacht, according to a person familiar with the sale. The deal was brokered by Mr. Santos with Ms. Ruiz, according to emails described to the Times. On November 3rd, 2022, Namaste left for the Bahamas from its berth in West Palm Beach, Florida. 15 days later, report records show, the boat returned to Florida under a new flag, the Cayman Islands, with a different name and a new owner. Mr. Tantillo rechristened the boat Neverland, which is weird because that was also the name of, well, okay, sure, you're thinking Peter Pan, but I'm thinking Michael Jackson and his Weirdo Ranch, and something, and every Republican accusation is a confession. Put it together in your head. Okay, well, that's an interesting story. So George Santos, weirdo and grifter, is at it again. We'll see whether that becomes anything as the investigation progresses. Okay, let's see. Other things that I thought might be relatable to things we discussed earlier in the show. I mentioned to Greg, but it may have been during the break, now that I think about it, that Cory Doctorow had a long thread on Mastodon, which he also published at his own website, about the Silicon Valley Bank situation, and an interesting sort of a different view of the whole situation. I mean, one that I think is reflective of the early days of our thinking about SVB Bank and the various excuses that are made for propping it up, some of which are more valid than others, but he's starting to take apart some of these excuses, and it was kind of interesting to see him do it. He writes here at his pluralistic blog, learning from Silicon Valley Bank's apologists. This is kind of an interesting thing, and it's illustrated in a weird way with photos of some interesting signage that he explains having, what shall we say, signage that he's seen over the years that I guess is metaphorical for his rant here. So it starts out with this sign that says, "This is not Disneyland. Do not let children drive." Okay, what's up with that? There's another one, another weird sign that says, "Pull on handle to open closet. Handle is rigid and does not turn." Those are some weird signs. Why does he have these? He says, "My weird hobby is taking pictures of signs, especially vernacular signs, handwritten and odd. The best kinds of signs tell you what other people think you are thinking, or what you don't understand. I've nabbed over 4,600 of them." And there's a link to a Flickr collection of these things. You see what I mean, though? There's clearly some sort of understanding in the mind of the person making these weird signs that doesn't exactly translate in the letters there. You have to kind of figure out what are they talking about, and that is something of a window into the way they think you think. I don't know what's going on. I don't know where this is happening, but apparently he must have seen some people letting children drive cars around, and somehow, it's not Disneyland. This isn't like a fun ride thing. It's dangerous. Don't do it. But I mean, there's no room on the sign for, hey, I've had some bad experiences in my parking lot of my store. Some people who are letting their kids, it was probably people trying to teach their kids to drive. I don't know. It was captured on video. I don't know what's going on, but it leads to all sorts of weird speculation. What is this person thinking? Or the pull on the handle to open closet. Some handle is rigid and does not turn. I guess they must have seen people trying to open the closet and trying to push the handle down in order to turn the latch, but there's no latch. I have a door like that on the washroom, not the where the washer and dryer are, the laundry. Yeah, I don't have a separate laundry room, but the doors that they're behind have those rigid handles. And I guess some people, trying to push them down, and they're like, oh, this door is locked. No, it's perfectly open. You just have to pull on it. So I guess people were having trouble. They put out the sign. You get the idea. That's not the point of this article, but just to explain what's going on. He says, Continuing here, I think you learn more about the world by delving into others' misconceptions than you learn from their factual understandings. Facts are out there for anyone to discover, but when someone inadvertently affords you a glimpse into their wrong beliefs, well, that's something that can't be learned in any other way. Which brings me to the apologists for Silicon Valley Bank, who are busily churning out incredibly revealing bad takes about why bailing out SVB was the right thing to do, and why you're wrong to call it a bailout, and why all of this is very regrettable, in or capitalized very regrettable, but nevertheless also capitalized the right thing to do. Okay, well, we are coming up on our break, and so we'll read you the examples and reasoning from Cory Doctorow's lengthy mastodon thread, now collected at Pluralistic, and we'll explain exactly what he's talking about. And I think you'll find that he's making some sense in all of that, even if it doesn't necessarily change your mind. But it's interesting to read these perspectives, because this is why we're all of two minds on the SVB Bank situation. He speaks right to it. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with reading Cory Doctorow's take on what's happening with the SVB situation. Right, we're getting around now, as he says, to the apologists for Silicon Valley Bank, who are busily churning out incredibly revealing bad takes, in his view, about why bailing out SVB was the right thing to do, and why you're wrong to call it a bailout, and why all of this is very regrettable, but nevertheless the right thing to do. Well, he begins, here's a terrible reason to support the SVB bailout, because if we let all the tech companies who did business with it fail, you might not be able to get into your house anymore after your smart lock fails because the cloud service it depends on cut off the startup that made it because their bank account went up in a puff of smoke. That's interesting. But I guess is that there's a link here that must be to someone making that claim. The Silicon Valley Bank contagion is just beginning, a headline in Wired magazine saying the collapse of SVB isn't just a tech industry problem and the rest of the world's about to find out why. And I guess they must make the allegation in there. Yeah, well, what if that happens to you? And I mean, yeah, what if it does? Well, there's a couple of reactions you might have. One might be, oh my God, bail out the bank so that this doesn't happen and I'm not locked out of my house. But Cory has a different reaction in mind. He says, look, if you think the fact that my internet of crap, and the people use a different term for that, and you know how we are about things like that. It makes us say the internet of the internet of S word door. Like if you think the fact that my internet of crap door lock failed because the company that designed it made no plan to let me into my house if they went out of business would make me sympathetic to that company, you are out of your effing mind. If that happened to me, it would make me want to tear the lock out of my door, hunt down the CEO of the company that made it, set the lock on fire, and throw it through their front window. I mean, yeah, I guess it probably would. And so that's an interesting point. Yeah, thinking it all the way through. Like, well, wait a second. We have to bail out this bank so that the company who effing locked me out of my own house survives? No, we should kill the company that locked me out of my own house. That there was no plan for the very obviously possible outcome of their going out of business or having service interrupted in any way for any reason. There's got to be a backup plan. If they didn't have one, you're going to want to burn that company to the ground. Interesting. True, right? Yeah, now that I think about it. Here's another terrible reason to support the bailout. If SVB's depositors lose their money, every other large depositor will flock to Morgan Stanley on the theory that Morgan Stanley is too big to fail. And then they will behave just as recklessly. But they'll never be allowed to go under precisely because they are so structurally important. I guess that argument now being made at, as the link would have it, marginalrevolution.com. You can head over there to see exactly how they make it. I'm pretty sure this is true, he says. It doesn't make me want to support an SVB bailout, though. It makes me want to break up Morgan Stanley and regulate the everlasting crap out of the resulting fragments and create massive public banks that are run by and for their depositors, insulated from the reckless, speculative conduct of these maniacs who keep crashing the world economy. Yeah, all right, that's a good point. And speaking of public banks, he provides a link to the Prospect, where Ryan Cooper had written very recently about public banking options. Let's get rid of this one. Why is this? Okay, back to pluralistic. One more very bad reason to support the bailout. It's not a bailout. Or at least, quote unquote, it's not a bailout. The Biden administration wants us to know that SVB's creditors and shareholders aren't being bailed out here, just the depositors. Every day, as he says, everyday Fulton with more than $250,000 in liquid cash in their checking accounts. Whomst among us can't relate to that? Yeah, that is kind of a strange sort of situation. For individuals as opposed to companies or startups or whatever. But, yeah, that's kind of interesting. A link provided here to NBC News on that front. Well, as he goes on to say, there are a lot of totally normal people who would suffer if not for this bailout. The people who clean the toilets or answer the customer service calls for tech companies aren't stock option fattened bros in Patagonia vests. They're totally normal working people who took no risks and bear no responsibility for the failure of SVB. But come on, does anyone seriously believe that the absolute effing ghouls who came out against a barely there student debt cancellation as a precursor to literal Stalinist gulags are advocating now for endless billions for SVB's depositors because of the janitors? That is a good point too, right? You know, you cared nothing for the economic disaster being visited on student borrowers, but we're supposed to believe that your real motivation here, after all, we can't let the poor working people who are just depending on these places, these startups for their paychecks to put food on the table, we can't let them suffer because of some other person's carelessness or the collapse of the economy. We suddenly care about janitors, but not about student debt. Although, you know, I guess you could differentiate and say, well, the janitors didn't borrow the money and then say they couldn't pay it back in the view of, you know, people who are opposed to the student loan bailout. But, you know, that is interesting. All of a sudden, you know, the everyman working poor are the real motivation for the bailout. I think that's really more of a wink, wink. That's a better story to tell than bailing the rest of us out, which, you know, you could tell a sympathetic story about yourself, but you don't think it'll work. Anyway, then a link provided here to a Forbes article about it. Larry Summers says, now is not the time for moral hazard lectures about bailouts. The time for that was when you were possibly bailing out student borrowers. Listen, he comes back to the story. People aren't pissed off about the bailout because they want startups to fail. They're pissed off because they are living in the century of socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor. They're pissed off because the Treasury official who presided over the theft of millions of houses by corrupt, bailed-out banks after the 2008 great financial crisis, and then wrote academic articles defending the decision to, quote, foam the runways for the banks with everyday Americans' homes, is about to join the Federal Reserve Board. And apparently that is what? Janice Eberly? Is that right? There's a link here to one of his previous pieces. Biden set to appoint mass foreclosure cheerleader to the Fed. And yeah, that harkens way back to the 2008 banking crisis and real estate crisis. It's a very interesting reference. And the fact that somebody who was, in fact, pro bailout then could be on their way to the Fed now is something of a troubling concept. They're pissed off, he says, because Biden reneged on his promise for muscular sweeping student debt cancellation in favor of a self-immolating weak sauce version that would barely dent the crushing financial devastation faced by millions of young people, only to have the illegitimate dotards of the Supreme Court make even that symbolic gesture moot as they take up the challenge to the legality of the student loan forgiveness. As to what Biden should do about it, the same thing Trump would. Pack the court. Pack the effing court. Pack it. Just do it. The court's legitimacy could not sink any lower. There is no downside. Do it. Yeah. The rage at well-capitalized startups being rescued from unearned distress isn't motivated by a free-floating tech-lash rage at bros. It's a rage born of the fact that young Americans are being put on the hook for their things like their dead parents' debt. Another pluralistic article to which he refers here, in which he says, well, I guess just that people are finding themselves being chased by bill collectors for the debt held by their parents even after they've died. There is infinite political will and bottomless appetite for money creation when VC-backed companies face distress. But when the death of your parents is followed by years of brutal debt collector arm breakers chasing you from phone number to phone number, it's just crickets. There's no question that the SVB failure resulted from a series of extremely technical phenomena that offer a fascinating peek into the behind-the-scenes forces that power an economy built on private banking and homeownership as the sole means of intergenerational wealth transfer. But the fact that this is a complicated circumstance doesn't mean that lay people don't have a right to be furious about it. We should all be suspicious of the inevitabilist narratives of the experts who claim that none of this could have been avoided. When finance experts tell you that you have no business opining on this highly technical matter, just remember that these are the same experts who were paid fantastic gobs of cash to certify that all these failing banks were just groovy mere weeks ago, as the Wall Street Journal did in this linked article. Those same experts were caught bribing government officials to help their top staff cheat on ethics exams, of all things. How interesting is that? Another pluralistic reference here. That sounds like an interesting headline. I'd like to see what that one says. Capitalism's crooked refs. All right, so you can take a look at that. Guess KPMG is implicated in this, according to the graphic that goes along with it. But like Marcy Wheeler, a lot of references to his own previous writing. Sometimes if you're not up to speed on all of it, it might require some additional reading. Even if it turns out to be true that the kind of risk that SVB was exposed to is an inevitable consequence of an economy built on private banking and housing as an asset rather than as a human right, remember that those choices are not inevitable. The decision to make housing the primary driver of intergenerational wealth transfer is both recent and very, very stupid. And another linked article, I guess, explaining why. Private banking doesn't need to be an unregulated free-for-all, nor does it have to be the only game in town. There is, of course, the public banking option, which he pushes again. As SVB's apologists insist, that tech startups should be preserved lest our Internet of Things gadgets break themselves, or that SVB should be preserved so that the Morgan Stanley cancer doesn't creep into more of our social organs, or that bailing out SVB is acceptable because it's to defend elite startup founders, not ultra-wealthy bank owners. They are missing the effing point, but they're missing it in a useful way. Like any weird sign, these bad takes teach us a lot about how the people who utter them model our own beliefs. They think that people like smart gadgets. They think that we don't want the finance sector reformed. They think that we're motivated by Schadenfreude, which means that they also think we've forgotten about broken student debt promises, about robo-signing and the foreclosure epidemic. That's where it becomes important that a foreclosure era crisis cheerleader should become a Federal Reserve governor that was referred to earlier. Yeah, the robo-signing and foreclosure epidemic. Boy, that brings back some bad memories. They think we are fully on board with rugged individualism for the poor and socialism for the rich. The bad takes reveal a profoundly out-of-touch elite, the spiritual descendants of the French aristos who went to the guillotine with sincerely baffled hearts, unable to imagine why anyone would be this angry at them. Upton Sinclair said, as Greg often reminds us, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. It is even more difficult to get a 1%er to understand something when the system that insulates them from the endless spiraling economic wreckage of our new feudal economy is on the line." So how do you like that? That was referenced, filled, and perhaps you want to go back and take a look through them and read the articles to which he's referring in each of these times to give more context to it. But anyway, certainly the Internet of Things excuse isn't a terrific one by any stretch of the imagination. And the number of other reasons, I think, if you really parse them, at the very least, you'll see that there's still plenty of room for enormous frustration, at the minimum, with all of this stuff. Okay, so I just wanted to note that that was still looming out there and still a real thing. Now, back to another of our earlier stories by reference. I have Patrick Snyder's message via the Twitter hashtag here. He includes the tweet of Dan Friedman, who writes on the Go Wenwei situation. "For the last few days, followers of exiled Chinese mogul Go Wenwei have been tweeting at me, urging each other to try to get me suspended for writing articles exposing activities of Go and Steve Bannon, who works with and for Go." A couple points on this, and I guess he includes one such tweet. But at any rate, you can take his word for it based on this one, that there are lots of people trying to get him suspended. He goes on to explain, though, "I doubt these people can get me suspended for journalism, even from Elon Musk's Twitter. But if they did, they'd be doing me and the stories they're trying to suppress a favor. Less Twitter for me, more attention for the articles. Do your best, ants," he has to say. And he's including here the tweet from someone we've read before on the Twitter account, Mrs. Panstrepon, who writes, "Time out from all things Santos. Bannon's partner in crime, Go Wenwei, is trying to run Mother Jones journalist Dan Friedman off Twitter, employing his usual mob tactics." Okay. Now back to Friedman. "Ironically, I just wrote a story noting that Go followers in 2020 engaged in a coordinated effort to tweet out explicit pictures of Hunter Biden and lies about him, an effort that violated Twitter rules, including one against coordinated harmful activity." And here he includes a link to his Mother Jones piece. "We found the guys behind the Hunter Biden porn that Elon Musk whatever, Elon Musk, what was it, won't shut up about. This is not a First Amendment thing. You remember when that was Elon Musk's issue of the day? The Twitter files prove that they intervened to save Biden and the Biden campaign by suppressing the Hunter Biden story. And remember that now arrested Go Wenwei was apparently the money behind that effort, in case you were inclined to feel bad for him, although I don't know how you could. The Go people seem especially mad about this article, Dan says, which suggested Go exercises control over Getter, that other Twitter alternative that the right wing started, one of 17, I think. It includes audio of Go giving instructions to Getter CEO Jason Miller, one of the other more disgusting people from Trump world, who previously had claimed falsely that Go had no day-to-day role with Getter. But here's audio of him being given marching orders. That article is bad for Go because he filed for bankruptcy last year and claims to have no assets, no stake in Getter. The trustee representing Go's debtors is trying to find hidden funds. If Go runs Getter, the trustee can recover money he invested in it. If Go followers want articles to complain about, they should start with this one, which detailed how Go has used his supposed opposition to the CCP and various misinformation efforts to get money from his fans. Many have since accused him of fraud. That another Mother Jones piece, is it likewise by Dan Friedman? Yes, it is. A fugitive tycoon, Chinese tycoon, met Steve Bannon. Misinformation mayhem ensued. But I guess he figured out in his dealings with Bannon that there was grift to be had in being outspoken as an opponent of the Chinese Communist Party. Dan says also, I wrote about Go's role in spreading lies based on material from Hunter's laptop that he's done before and has done again since. Go, with Bannon advising him, also secretly bankrolled some of the big lie efforts in late 2020. Here, again, another Mother Jones piece. A fugitive Chinese mogul spent big to overturn the 2020 election. So that's some of the things he was doing with his money. Also, Bannon was meeting with Go followers on October 31st. It's almost like that's part of his job. He notes, when he inadvertently exposed Trump's premeditated plan to use false Election Day victory claims as part of his scheme to try to steal the election. Also, Go fans should check out Evan Osnos's great New Yorker story, which details Go's murky and maybe still active links to Chinese intelligence, which would call into question his efficacy as a opponent of the Chinese Communist Party, would it not? Anyway, even this half-assed effort to report me for writing about Go helps show that his followers are still engaged in the kind of activity detailed here. And what is detailed here? It's a link to, let's see, a graphic report here. Ants in a Web, deconstructing Go Wenwei's online whistleblower movement. And it's a PDF and a lengthy one at that, an interesting report. Guo has sued the press for writing about his Chinese intelligence ties and sent followers to harass critics, including real Chinese dissidents, at their homes. He's recently sent followers to confront adversarial parties and their children in his bankruptcy. Sounds like a real mobster. Go Wenwei is still pushing various ventures launched with Bannon's counsel, in which he constantly is seeking investments from supporters in the international Chinese diaspora. He calls these the G series. Go uses his nominal opposition to the CCP to win support from Chinese people. Then he tells them that investing in these sketchy companies will help, quote, take down the CCP, and also that he will guarantee they don't lose money. But, of course, he lost all of his, so that's not going to happen. Many of these, quote, investors have since complained that they were defrauded and the SEC has since fined Go's companies in 2021. But he is still pushing crypto and other ventures on his backers while claiming in bankruptcy court to have no assets. The online swarming and protests outside homes of critics that Go encourages are aimed, I think, at protecting the financial scheme that underlies Go's faux political project. With Bannon's help, he sucks money from people, poor Chinese immigrants, who they pretend to champion. Go's harassment efforts don't much affect reporters like me. If anything, they help draw attention to articles. But they do intimidate victims of his alleged scams, often people who don't speak English, and cause others to make why bother type decisions. The reason I did this thread, along with promoting past stories, is to encourage people with info about Go and Bannon's G companies and various other schemes, including fraud victims, to share info. We plan to keep reporting on it. Okay, so very interesting and revealing of a larger grift here. And I don't know how people are able to make a living out of this, but I guess if there's enough Chinese exiles who are angry about the experience and the treatment that they had at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party before their emigration, or for that matter after, now that we've found out that the Chinese government is harassing emigres even after they arrive here or wherever their ultimate destination is, and making life miserable for them even when they've tried to separate themselves from China and make a new life. Look, I just want nothing to do with China. Leave me alone. That's not enough for the Chinese government, apparently. And this guy exploits that. He knows that they're being harassed, and he tells them, if you turn over your hard-earned cash to me, or quote-unquote invest it in this quote-unquote company, you'll help take down the CCP. And they want, more than anything, to be able to take them down, but that's probably no sort of way of doing it. Okay, very interesting, and there's a lot of material to be mined there. And of course, maybe tomorrow would be a great day to return to that weird and unusual and complicated story that I keep threatening to go back to, but never actually have time for, on Pras Michel. All right, getting close to the end of the show for today. And, well, let's see. Is there anything else that we might be able to squeeze in before closing out for the day? Yes, I will at least put this on the record. How about this? CNN reporting that Fulton County, Georgia investigators have another recording of a Trump phone call pressuring a Georgia official from back in the 2020 election. Let's see how much of this we can get in before we run out of time. Fulton County investigators have an audio recording. Lordy, there are tapes. An audio recording of a phone call that former President Donald Trump made to the Georgia House Speaker to push for a special session to overturn Joe Biden's 2020 victory in the state, according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The Fulton County Special Grand Jury, which investigated Trump's actions in the state after the 2020 election, heard the recording of Trump's phone call to David Ralston, according to 5 of the jurors who spoke anonymously to the AJC. They shouldn't be doing this, but a source confirmed to CNN the existence of the recording, which hasn't been made public. The recording adds to what's known about the pressure campaign by Trump and his allies on Georgia officials. It's the third audio recording of the former president's phone calls to Georgia officials that is known to exist. I think I only knew about one. But, all right, I don't know. Vague memories of having heard about a second one now that they say it. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. The special grand jury recently concluded its work and recommended multiple indictments, according to the foreperson who has spoken out publicly. And now it's up to Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis to make charging decisions. Ralston, who died last year, described his December 2020 call with Trump during an interview the following day. Trump, quote, would like a special session of the Georgia General Assembly, Ralston said. He's been clear on that before, and he was clear on that on the phone conversation yesterday. You know, I shared with him my belief that based on the understanding I have of Georgia law, that it wasn't going to be, or that it was going to be very much an uphill battle. Basically, it was almost impossible, I think. According to the Georgia Constitution, not only can the governor convene a special session, the General Assembly can call itself into a special session, though that requires the signatures of 3/5 of the Georgia House. Former U.S. Senator David Perdue, a staunch Trump ally from Georgia, also requested a special session be convened during a meeting in December of 2020 at Truist Park, where the Atlanta Braves play. Governor Brian Kemp, Perdue, and former Senator Kelly Loeffler, the state's other U.S. senator at the time, and their aides all attended this meeting. Interesting. Perdue did not immediately respond to CNN's request for comment, and Trump pressured Kemp in late 2020 to convene a special session to overturn Biden's victory and to order an audit of mail-in ballots. Kemp rejected Trump's request for a special session and said that he did not have the power to order a separate audit of mail-in ballots. There is also a recording of Trump's call to a top investigator with the Georgia Secretary of State's office in December of 2020. Yes, okay. While they were looking into allegations of irregularities with signature matching in Cobb County. In that phone call, Trump urged the investigator to look for fraud in the presidential election, telling her that she would be, quote, praised for overturning results that were in favor of Biden. Audit results in Cobb County, by the way, found no fraudulent ballots or wrongdoing. The special grand jury investigation was launched by the Fulton County District Attorney after audio was made public of the now infamous hour-long phone call in which Trump pressured Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to find the exact number of votes needed to overturn Biden's victory, and suggested that he publicly announced that he had, quote, recalculated the election results. Okay, we'll see what comes of this one, if anything. Boy, it's all piling up, but I'm still hungry for an indictment, and we're still waiting on Fulton County for that. But you don't have to wait for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, because it comes up next, right here on Netroots Radio with Justice Putnam as your host.
NetrootsRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, coming up next then, the medication abortion battle is emboldening the right-wing war on science. A Wisconsin man pled guilty to his role in the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping scheme. California state regulators could decide to impose the nation's first penalty on oil companies for price gouging. Go, California. Stay tuned for all that next.